for the Travel Channel. And believe it or not, this old house is the Brady Bunch home. But I bet you didn't know we had some pretty famous neighbors. The Cunninghams lived just around the corner. That's right. Happy Days was set in Milwaukee, but the house they use for the exteriors is right here in Hollywood. And that's just one secret. The Travel Channel has the real locations.
Since Pablo died, we have a mass officiated in his name every month. At the same time, we help the homeless so they can eat breakfast.
Ermilda Escobar sees this as a fitting tribute to her son, Pablo, a man who is still revered as a hero in Medellin. To the rest of the world, Pablo Escobar is known as one of the most dangerous criminals in history. The original cocaine kingpin, a pioneer whose legacy of violence and corruption lives on a decade after his death. His sheer savagery set him apart, but Escobar's brand of terrorism was not new to Colombia. It began long before he was even born. During the late 1940s, Colombia was torn apart by a civil war between the ruling Conservative Party and its liberal opposition. Out of the violence rose a group of outlaws known as banditos, who were loyal to no one but themselves. They came from poor rural areas and struck fear in the hearts of the powerful. To the common man, they were heroes.
The people of Colombia, because they were either oppressed by the government or tormented by the revolutionaries or by the paramilitaries, found a kind of natural appeal to the banditos.
These men were an inspiration to the young Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria. Pablo was born to Abdel de Jesus and Ermilda Escobar on December 1st, 1949. He was the third of their 7 children. The family lived in the farming community of Rio Negro, 25 miles from the city of Medellin. His father was a farmer and his mother a teacher.
She was from a lower middle class sort of background, but educated. She had striven to ensure that she was educated and had the determination to teach others.
My father was a cattle rancher in Rio Negro, where he owned livestock. Every morning, he and his employees would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to milk the livestock for cheese, butter, and milk to send to the village.
Abel and Ermilda were married on March 4th, 1946. Pablo was born 3 years later and immediately became the center of attention.
He would cry all the time. He was very spoiled. He was very cute when he was a little boy. Everybody wanted to hold him.
By the time Pablo started school, his mother had become the family's main breadwinner and head of the household. She taught her children the value of education and charity.
She was a good mother, a classic mother. Pablo and his brothers and sisters, doted much more on her than they did on their father, Abel.
We received great advice from both our parents. They taught us to be hard workers, but most importantly, they taught us to keep our word.
He used to like to say in later life that he was raised poor in Colombia. He wasn't. He was basically middle class, if not upper middle class.
The Escobars moved from village to village, anywhere Pablo's mother could find a teaching job. No matter where the family lived, they were never completely safe from the violence that plagued their country.
We suffered a lot because my mama was a teacher at a school that was funded by the Conservative Party. So rebels of the Liberal Party came one day to burn the school down and tried to murder my mother and all of us. But the army came and saved us.
Pablo grew up at a time when there was violence everywhere, where his mother literally, prayed and promised to build a shrine to a particular icon of the Virgin if his life would be spared.
Like most Colombian kids, Pablo loved hearing stories about the bandit heroes who roamed the countryside. He admired their independence and how they looked out for the needy. He began trying to do the same.
At school, he had friends that were poorer than we were, and my mother had credit at the local food shops. So he would take my mother's credit and would give food and drinks to the poor children during recess.
When he was a little boy, he would take his food to an image of Christ I had at home. He would take a piece of bread and a piece of meat, or the best food he had, and would go to the statue and say, "Poor Christ, do you want to eat a little meat?"
In 1961, when Pablo was 12 years old, his family finally settled in the village of Envigado, south of Medellin. His mother opened an elementary school there. The following year, the teenager went to high school in Medellin. He hung out with a group of students who supported leftist politics and the Cuban Revolution, which had happened a few years earlier. Pablo especially admired how Fidel Castro had challenged authority and rose to lead a nation. Soon, the teenager was rebelling against his teachers. He was suspended for stealing answers to a test and sharing them with other students. He began smoking marijuana and skipping classes. By 1966, the defiant 16-year-old had dropped out of high school. He started a cycle of sleeping all day and chain-smoking marijuana until dawn. He dreamed of being a millionaire, but he had no interest in pursuing a traditional job.
He's faced with a dilemma. If he's going to be successful, he either has to change his lifestyle, go back to college, do something like that, or he could move into some sort of criminal enterprise.
The teenager began spending more and more time on the mean streets of Medellin. The city was a hotbed of crime, and Pablo soon discovered creative ways to make money.
Pablo Escobar is purported to have gotten his start in crime by stealing headstones from a graveyard, shaving off the inscriptions and selling the blanks.
Pablo found that he was a natural leader. Soon he had formed his own gang and was committing more sophisticated crimes.
He started to realize he could also steal cars and sell those spare parts on the second-hand market. And then he went, well, why not actually go one step further and offer insurance, which became a kind of extortion, whereby if you pay me, I won't steal your car.
Pablo also used the cars he stole to reward those who helped him. By the time he turned 21, he had a loyal following, and it was about to get even larger. In 1971, a wealthy Colombian landowner named Diego Echevarria was kidnapped. He was later found tortured and strangled to death.
Echevarria was not a popular figure in Medellin. He was a rich industrialist who was resented by many of the poor people there.
The case was never solved, but the cunning Escobar happily took credit for the murder.
It showed that Pablo was somebody to be reckoned with, but he was not afraid to challenge somebody from the upper echelons of society.
Pablo was more than anything a very charismatic person. He was very sure of himself, and he was exceptionally convincing. You might say he had an exaggerated ego.
The poor people of Medellin celebrated Echevarria's death. They began calling Escobar El Doctor, a title of respect. While Escobar's reputation was growing in Colombia, a significant social change was taking place in the United States. During the 1960s, young Americans had enjoyed the high of marijuana, but the 1970s me generation was looking for a harder, edgier drug. Cocaine was fast becoming America's new addiction and would soon provide Pablo Escobar with the fuel he needed to build a criminal empire. Pablo Escobar had already become one of Medellin, Colombia's most notorious criminals.